Chapter 5. Snap. The moment Glenn flicked his fingers, the audience chamber shook a little. The flow of mana, which used to resemble a calm lake, rapidly became choppy waves and a gigantic iron door rose from the floor. The majestic iron door was large enough to almost reach the ceiling, and it was burning with golden flames. "Am my lord?" Raon strained his eyes. That door was the Sieghart repository, which could only be summoned by the lord of the house. It was the first time in 10 years that Glenn had summoned that door. "I shall return later." As Glenn raised his hand, the golden iron door opened smoothly. He turned around to check the golden flames burning over the sword once more, before entering the repository. The repository was heaped with innumerable treasures. Elixirs and weapons of the highest level, gems that could buy a whole castle, and various books. They were treasures that could incite war throughout the continent should they be exposed. Neither weapons nor gemstones, nor the neatly stacked elixirs that fervently revealed themselves attracted Glenn's attention. He went straight towards the large bookcase, deep within the repository. The cylindrical bookcase shot up at the end of the repository as if it were a world tree, and there were various books of all sorts on every shelf. Tap. When Glenn lightly kicked the floor, his body began to rise into the air. He stepped through the air and headed towards the first shelf of the bookcase. The first shelf was unlike the others, and only had 2 books. He tried to grab and take the old and yellow book in front of him. However, the book was unmovable, as if pinned down by a boulder. "It doesn't move, as expected." Glenn clicked his tongue and took the red book right next to it. The second book fell out smoothly, unlike the first one, and there was no problem reading it as it was preserved very well. Tap tap. Glenn was flipping through the book when his hands suddenly stopped. He frowned as he read the words on the page. The aura of the first leader of Sieghart had a golden color like the sun, and its tremendous firepower was capable of melting devildom's flames. Glenn closed his eyes, recalling the golden flame that Raon summoned. Golden mana, golden flame. Yellow aura wasn't uncommon. But there was only one occurrence of mana with a dark gold color throughout the history of Sieghart. "Raon, what on earth?" "Mommy is sorry." As soon as Sylvia entered the annex building, she hugged Raon tighter than usual, to the point that it was difficult to breathe. "It's okay." Noticing Sylvia's back trembling, Raon patted her shoulders. "I'm not sure yet." In his previous life, he didn't know what emotions were. He killed if he was asked to kill, he kidnapped if he was asked to kidnap, he stole if he was asked to steal. There were only relationships of order and obedience, a handler and a dog. However, it was different now. Sylvia, Helen, and the maids gave to him unconditionally, without anything in return. It was the first life where he only received, so he couldn't explain what type of emotion the tingling sensation that he was experiencing in his chest was. But there was one thing he knew. He didn't want Sylvia or the maids to cry. Even if they couldn't always smile, he didn't want them to be sad. "I wouldn't have felt anything if they had laughed at me, instead." However, the people at Lord's Manor laughed at Sylvia. The collaterals under the platform blatantly cackled, and the direct line on the platform frowned as if they were observing a hateful bug. "I will show them." Everyone who laughed at Sylvia would be taught a lesson. Their nasty behavior would be returned in full. It was a sunny afternoon. A young boy was sitting on the grass in the garden. With his dark blonde hair fluttering in the wind, his facial features had a nearly perfect proportion, despite looking childlike. If there was one flaw, it would have been the way his pale face suggested his poor health. Sigh. The boy, who had stayed seated for a long time with his eyes closed, finally opened his eyes. "I'm about to have 3 rings of fire." Raon smiled slightly. He had already grown enough to be called a young boy, rather than a child. It has already been 7 years. 7 years had passed since the first judgment ceremony, and he was now 12 years old. Thanks to his regular training, the 2 rings of fire were about to become 3. It's a bit sad. If the ice wasn't spread throughout his body, he would have already gotten 3 stars. But training alongside the ice inevitably slowed down his progress. Still, it wasn't all in vain. Status window. He thought the now familiar words to himself. His water resistance had reached 2 stars, and the symptoms of his hand and feet becoming stiff had vanished once the cold body disappeared from state. It was still difficult to move his body because of his other constitutions, but the problem would be solved naturally once the Ring of Fire reached a higher star rating. Raon closed the status window and stood up on the grass. I need to start physical training now. Sylvia and the maids worried less now since he didn't get cold as easily, but they would always stop him whenever he tried to move his body. Since physical training was necessary to reach the higher star of Ring of Fire, he needed to find a way to train without hiding. Is there any way that I can train openly? He could force it, but it was difficult to go against Sylvia. Even though she didn't give him any orders, he had no choice but to obey her. Young master. While he was pondering what to do, Helen came running out of the annex building. What are you doing? We must participate in the judgment ceremony. You are just like milady. Ah, that's true. Except for those who were outside or were on a mission, everyone had to participate in the judgment ceremony, so he wasn't an exception. I'm gonna have to see those annoying stuffed shirts again. He was blatantly laughed at again at the second judgment ceremony a few years before. It was obvious that they would spout incomprehensible nonsense about cowards or fugitives again. Why, young master, please keep your voice down. Helen put her finger to her lip while looking around. Because there might be other people listening? The eyes and ears are already open inside this household. You worry too much, but alright. With a tut, Raon went back inside the annex building, where Sylvia was waiting in full dress. You can rest in the room if you're tired. Mommy can go on her own. Sylvia, who had a bit more wrinkles around her eyes, stroked his head. It's okay. Raon shook his head and went into the room. I need to check how the people who laughed at us have changed. For an assassin, observing one's target's changes was the topmost priority. Raon gladly decided to participate in the judgment ceremony. Along with Sylvia and Helen, Raon entered the audience chamber where the judgment ceremony was held. He's still short. He's so skinny. If you didn't see his golden hair and red eyes, you'd believe that he's from another family. That handsome appearance is the only thing he has that befits Sighart. His pale face doesn't look that handsome, though. It was as expected. Just as always, those of the direct line ignored him as if they had no interest in him, and the collaterals were whispering sarcastically. It's a relief. They were still laughing at him and Sylvia. He felt rather satisfied at their unchanging attitude. Joanna, Henry, Denier. Looking around from top to bottom of the platform, he reiterated the names of direct line and collaterals. Lord Glenn Sighart entered after about 30 minutes of waiting, sitting at the backmost seat under the platform. He was as dignified as 7 years ago. No, he was even more dignified than before. Glenn went to the platform and began the judgment ceremony. Because there were only children from collaterals and vassals who went through the judgment ceremony this time, the ceremony didn't even last 3 hours. He ignored the mocking words that he heard, comparing him with the collateral children with high mana purity. Today's judgment ceremony is now over. Thank you for... Wait. Glenn raised his hand to interrupt the moderator, who was about to announce the end of the ceremony. Raon Sighart. The gaze directed at Raon for the first time was that of an absolute being, one who sat on the throne to overlook the world. The room fell silent, and everyone's attention fixated on him. Me? Raon swallowed. He was confused because he didn't think he was going to be called. My lord? Sylvia shook her head in panic, and Helen held her hand tightly. You must have received the order to participate in the basic training, as a member of the family. Why have you not responded when it's already been a month? Participating in the basic training? He had never received such a thing. When he looked next to him, he saw Sylvia biting her lips. She must have known. My lord. Raon is different from other children. He still has ice in his body. There is no exception nor refusal for one who has received the name of Sighart. He has difficulties walking normally. He won't be able to handle the training. Sylvia firmly shook her head. If you can't walk, then crawl and train. That is Sighart. Resting his chin on his right hand, Glenn closed his eyes. I can't accept it. No, please give me some time. If you can't accept it, are you going to run away once again? Along with that child? That's. He could feel Sylvia's hand getting wet, as she was grabbing his right hand. In this land, you can only live as a Sieghart. If you don't like it, then get out. Glenn's voice was cold, as if they weren't related by blood. Isn't she going to run away again at this rate? That's going to be amusing, but she doesn't have an energy center nor a mana circuit to break anymore. To think such a person is from the direct line, tut. Observing Sylvia, Glenn, and everyone in the room, Raon calmed down his glare. I get it now. He could understand the reason Sylvia received this kind of treatment, despite being from the direct line. The reason that she was looked down upon by not only the direct line but also the collateral. It's because she left the household. She didn't have an aura, despite having learned martial arts. That meant that she had either broken her energy center, or had never learned to use aura, and the former appeared to be the case. She must have broken her energy center and her mana circuit and left the household, where she met father and married him. And she must have returned reluctantly because father died after she got pregnant with me. It was understandable. Because she threw away her position in the direct line and came back, she received inferior treatment than a member of the collateral line. However, that was other people's point of view, and their circumstances. As Sylvia's son, Raon couldn't bear her treatment. Tap. Raon released Sylvia's hand and took a step forward. Why, young master? Raon, mommy will take care of it. It's okay. After shaking his head at them, he stood in front of Glenn. My lord, I will participate in the training starting next month, as you have commanded. Facing his gaze, which looked like he was looking at a bug rather than his grandson, Raon lowered his head. But you didn't even know that there was training. Glenn's third son, Uncle Denier Sieghart, spoke. He was the only person among the direct line who looked apologetic. Indeed. Despite what it is called, basic training isn't on a level that a patient can manage. You should withdraw for now. It's all right. Raon looked at Glenn, instead of Denier. I've received the name Sieghart, so I shall pay for it. I will participate in training. Because his resolute voice wasn't befitting a child, people's gazes changed. They seemed to recognize him as a small pebble, but that was enough for now. He had the experience of becoming the greatest assassin, starting as a hunting dog at the rock bottom, and he could use the legendary Ring of Fire. Becoming the best in the household wasn't an impossible feat, not if he made use of his abilities. His revenge would be delayed? No. This way could end up being quicker. Raon clenched his small fist. I will show you how hard the pebble that you look down on is. Chapter 6. Do you understand how serious it is to mention the name Sieghart? Glenn Sieghart employed a small amount of pressure into his gaze. Coo. Raon bit his lip so hard that it nearly bled. It feels like my flesh is being crushed. The pressure that Glenn was exerting was a small amount, a cup of water against the vast ocean. However, it felt as though his heart was being squeezed. He could feel his clothes become sticky because of the cold sweat he broke into. If he hadn't practiced the Ring of Fire, he might have fainted already. Is this the warrior, the destructive king of the north? Considering his gaze alone held such pressure, his prowess surpassed Darius Robert. It was impossible to raise his head. Try saying it again. Can you take responsibility for what you've just said? My lord. Raon is still young. He doesn't know what he is talking about. That's true. Raon has lived in the annex building all this time, so he doesn't know about the name of Sieghart. Sylvia and Helen ran next to him and knelt. My lord, he is just a child who doesn't know anything. Please withdraw your pressure. Denier Sieghart stood up and defended them against the pressure. Sir Denier. As expected of Sir Denier, he would even care for an insolent kid like him. The broadness of his mind is even greater than his might. The collaterals praised Denier's behavior. I am speaking right now. Ugh. Coo. Denier and Sylvia both stepped back at once, hearing Glenn's mighty voice. They didn't move on their own. Glenn pushed them back with his voice alone. I'm as sorry. Denier lowered his head, but Sylvia was different. Father. She approached Glenn, enduring his pressure with her frail body, which didn't even possess aura. Raon is not yet ready to train. Sylvia's eyes reflected that she was solely worried about him. It pulled at Raon's heartstrings. I don't understand. He was choked up, but he couldn't tell if that emotion meant compassion, or worry, or something else. He just wished that she would always smile happily, instead of being in that state. I was an assassin. An assassin was a being that lived in the darkness. Being closer to death than life, they would never show themselves. However, I no longer am one. I'm not going to live as an assassin anymore. As Raon Zighart, and not as Raon the assassin, he resolved that he would return Sylvia to her original place. Crash! At that moment, he could hear a sound similar to one of the chains around his neck falling. I do not know. Raon forced himself to raise his head, facing Glenn's overbearing gaze directly. Suppressing the urge to close his eyes, he continued. I've been raised in the annex building, and not in the main building. I don't know how high and mighty Zighart is. Our Raon. Sylvia desperately called for him, but he didn't look back. That's why I want to see for myself what kind of place is Zighart, by participating in training. Once Raon finished talking, everyone held their breath and looked at Glenn. One of Glenn's eyebrows raised slightly. Do you mean that you will judge Zighart from basic training? That is the only way I can learn about Zighart right now. Then I will have to make sure that the instructor is fully prepared, so that you won't be disappointed. The room of audience became as quiet as a mouse, as Glenn's red eyes blazed. Coup. Being unable to withstand it any further, Raon finally bowed his head. He was only 12 years old, a child who couldn't endure a thousandth of Glenn's pressure. Yet he didn't give in. If he kept cultivating the Ring of Fire, and learned an efficient way of handling aura, he would be able to properly stand in front of him one day. Deciding that he would show that with action instead of word, he clenched his teeth. One day. Once everyone had left, only Glenn and his butler Ren remained in the silent audience chamber. Did you see? Yes, I saw it clearly. Ren nodded his head firmly in response to Glenn's question. That boy sure is something. The corners of Glenn's mouth lifted. A 12-year-old child that confidently talks back while withstanding my pressure. I have never seen something like that. It's my first time seeing it, as well. Ren smiled, tidying his hair. Not only his appearance, but his spirit is also just like my lord's in his childhood. Don't say strange things. Glenn snorted, as if telling him to stop spouting nonsense, but the corners of his mouth lifted even more, like a leaf blowing in the wind. Are you going to increase the difficulty of basic training? I shall, because many people have heard. Can young Master Raon really pass? Participating would already be difficult. Glenn shook his head without hesitation. His condition is better thanks to the elixir, but neither his constitution nor his health is good enough. Maybe he can once he recovers a bit more, but it's impossible for now. Then why? I've already mentioned it. There are no exceptions for those inheriting the name of Zighart. Raon licked his lips. He is still not honest. He could tell, as he had been with him for several dozen years. The reason Glenn called for Raon wasn't to pressure him, but to protect him by showing others that he didn't discriminate against him. Once Raon failed the training, he would probably give him an elixir and pretend to spare the rod and spoil the child. Although even Glenn shouldn't have expected Raon to come forth. I like young Master Raon's personality, but one thing worries me. It must be about the collateral and direct line's children. Yes. They won't have a considerable reaction, but he will be noticed in a way he hasn't been before. He withstood my lord's pressure, albeit a small amount. Measures should be. There is no need to provoke them. Just watch over him. Understood. Ren nodded immediately, despite his opinion being different, because Glenn was like a god to him. My lord, may I ask a question? If, by some chance, Raon manages to pass the basic training, what are you going to do? Pass? Resting his chin on his hand, Glenn recalled the judgment ceremony from 7 years ago. Golden flame. He wasn't sure if it was a coincidence or an accident, but Raon set ablaze the golden flame that only the first head of Sighart could use. That's impossible. However, if there is a 1 in 10,000th chance that it could happen. He smirked and stood from the throne. I will have to reward him accordingly. Upon entering the annex building, Raon was immediately dragged into Sylvia's room. Raon. Sylvia firmly grasped Raon's shoulders. Why did you do that? Sighart's training doesn't go easy on children. Your current health won't be able to handle it. You will just get hurt. Sylvia's voice was faint. Her worries for him made her hands tremble. I couldn't bear it. What? I'm not sure what emotion made me act like that. Raon closed his eyes. It was true. Despite living with Sylvia and Helen for 12 years, his emotions were still light, like a pastel blue color. But my chest tightens whenever Mom gets scorned in the main building. That's why I wanted to say something. Because he didn't want to lie to Sylvia and Helen, Raon replied honestly. Ah. Young Master Raon. Sylvia's lips parted, and Helen's lips trembled. Sigh. Sylvia released his shoulders and slowly closed, then opened her eyes. Raon, thank you for your consideration. However, you are still young. You don't need to be so thoughtful, not when you are at an age where you should be pampered. But you might not know, but Mommy is pretty strong. I can endure a lot more. Sylvia bit her tongue to stop her tears from spilling over. To such a child. Raon was too kind to her. As if he noticed the atmosphere in the household, he didn't act like a spoiled child. He endured by himself, even while sick. Because he was such a kind and considerate child, she couldn't let him bring hardship upon himself. Mommy will talk to grandfather. If I ask him to postpone the training for just a single year, even he would. I will try. No, I can do it. Raon shook his head. He did stand up for Sylvia, but there was also another reason. Basic training was an opportunity for him to train without being considerate to Sylvia and Helen. It would have been absurd to throw away this chance. It's true. I can do it, so trust me. Whether you can do it or not isn't important. The problem is that your health can get worse. Raon narrowed his eyes, seeing Sylvia's worried gaze. That's what she meant. Their point of view was different. He was talking about being able to handle the training, and Sylvia was worrying about his health. Because only the results were important when he was an assassin, he didn't understand Sylvia's heart. Then I will give up as soon as my health becomes worse. In order to lessen Sylvia's worries, he gave her a new answer. You don't even say anything when you are sick. How am I supposed to trust you? I promise. Ha! Sylvia grabbed her head and sighed. Lady Sylvia, how about trying to believe in young Master Raon for once? Helen, you should also know what kind of child Raon is. It's true that the training is harsh, but the current head instructor has the best insight in Sighart. He should be aware of the young master's condition, so he will stop him before it gets any worse. Ha! Sylvia sighed at Helen's words, and gently looked down at him. Raon, can you really promise? You must tell me as soon as anything feels weird in your body, okay? Okay. Raon nodded firmly. I will believe you this once. Thank you. However, I can't sit here doing nothing. What? I'll visit the 5th training ground. I need to give them a warning, at least. After saying that, she ran from the room. Young Master Raon. Once Sylvia left, Helen knelt and met his eyes. Never push yourself. If it becomes difficult, you must give up immediately. Do you understand me? I understand. You've already said it multiple times. It isn't enough, even if I say several thousands of times, let alone multiple times. Young Master must remember that you are weaker than other children and abandon your overconfidence. I understand. Because Helen was just as worried as Sylvia, he simply nodded. I'm sorry, but I'm never going to be the one to give up first. Even if he died from his lungs exploding, he wasn't going to stop. The higher the difficulty, the higher the level the ring of fire would grow. It would make both his mind and body stronger. Raon headed to the small garden behind the annex building. It feels so empty after visiting the main building. Unlike the main building, which had multiple facilities including an expansive training ground and a fashionable garden, the annex building only had a small garden and a lake. It was so small that it was impossible to train without being noticed by Sylvia, but it was still an elegant place. Raon sat down on the chair in the garden. The training should be quite difficult. Just as Sylvia and Helen worried, his body was still not perfect. Ice remained in his mana circuit, his development was slow, and his stamina was lacking. Considering how widespread the notorious Sighart training was, it was safe to assume that even a child's basic training was going to be difficult. However, he had the memories from his past life, where he went through a hell worse than that. With that memory, he was never going to crumble. This is the real beginning. If learning the Ring of Fire was the preparation of the land, then the training he'd begin next month was the foundation work to build a house. In order to construct a tall building later, the foundation needed to be solid. I will show them. I will accomplish a greater achievement than anyone else from the direct line, so that everyone who laughed at us will shut their mouth. And that bastard, Darius Robert. His revenge would be delayed a little, but his real objective was Darius Robert, the Sky Sword Saint. Until the day he unmasked him and cut his throat, he would never stop. Ha! After looking at the golden sun setting down to the western mountain, he closed his eyes and took the mana into his body. The ring of fire surrounding his heart started spinning violently.